Okay, so I'm going to respond to some of Rand Paul's comments today about, I guess, according to the liberal media, being anti-civil rights movement. But we have to look at the words he chose, and he chose them carefully. For a reason, it's a very touchy topic. However, the reality of the situation is that the civil rights movement did not, in fact, remove racism, and in fact, in many cases, actually promoted it and promoted the idea of statistics based on race. And I'll give some examples here of private institutions that should be allowed to discriminate based on the wants and needs of their customers. Say, for example, that a restaurant is opened and they serve fine Chinese cuisine, and they decide that they want to hire only people that are from China in order to serve the food and cook the food. I, as a customer going into a restaurant like that, would obviously want to enjoy the experience of eating fine Chinese cuisine, and that's a better marketing tool to have people from the nations of the food that you're serving to be from that country, to look as I would expect them to look. Same thing if I was to own a health club. I would certainly not want the people that I hire for the health club to be overweight. What sort of example does that set for my customers when I'm trying to come in and convince more people to join the health club and have overweight salespeople or overweight therapists there trying to convince them to join, and that exercise is good and that healthy eating is good? It does not make sense at all. So those are very obvious cases that I think most people would even tend to agree, left or right, or libertarian or statist. Now, let's look at some examples that a large majority of the population, including some Republicans, would look at and say, oh, that's obvious racism. And they may be right. In fact, they are right in some cases. However, the point that Rand Paul was trying to make is that the free market eliminates the idea of racism. In fact, it discourages it more than any sort of law, which can be easily skirted by any number of reasons. Say, for example, that I am a racist business owner, and I decide that I only want to hire white Caucasian males to work at my establishment. And so, two equally qualified people, one being a woman, one being a man, I decide to hire the man. And you know that if that was brought to court, I could probably make up some excuse of why I hired the man. But let's take a look at a more extreme example where I have a job and two people interview, and one of them is a woman who's exceptional for the position. And let's look at a man that also hired for the position or interviewed for the position, but he was underqualified. If I was racist, or I'm sorry, sexist, and decided to hire the underperforming male over the overperforming female, the only person I'm hurting is myself, because the skill sets of that woman should have dictated that they had the job. They didn't, and if my competition was smart, or if that woman was smart, she would immediately open up a business or work for a business that competes with me that is not willing to discriminate based on race and hire the best of the best people. Let's look at a different scenario where instead of suggesting that I hire only males, let's suggest for a second that I decide to hire males and females, but decide to pay all the females 20% less than an equally qualified male. You may think at first that the business owner is getting a good deal hiring the woman at a 20% discount. But what they've done is set themselves up as disadvantaged, because by underpaying, if that woman's value is truly worth the same salary as a male, there's a high probability that that female eventually leaves to the competition, leaving me with an open position or an empty requisition that I must fill again. Eventually, if I'm overpaying the males and underpaying the females, I'll find my company to have a majority of males that are either mediocre in performance and absent of females that were potentially higher performing. So, and my competition, let's say that they're even slightly racist and decide that they're going to hire females at a 5% pay cut versus the equally qualified males. In that case, the slightly less racist competition is going to succeed more because they're willing to hire the woman for a 15% pay raise over what I'm paying. And eventually the competition works that way up. So a woman, eventually somebody's going to come along and realize that the value of a woman's salary is equal to the man as long as they're performing at the same level of work. And anybody that's silly enough to not hire that person at a fair wage is simply going to be out of business. And if you disagree with that, then I would suggest find a racist company and immediately open up a competing business with them. If they're truly racist, if they're truly not hiring the best of the best, if they're truly underpaying their workers, then no doubt you would be able to hire the people that they turned away. You'd be able to pay more the people that are currently working for that company. So the whole idea of racism in the private sector is really only exists if the government would allow it, and could exist for a company, no question. But with competition, with multiple places of employment, racism is discouraged by reduced profit, increased cost. So if I, as a private business owner, am willing to pay for my racism, then eventually I will go out of business versus my competition, or eventually I'll earn less over my lifetime. And that's certainly my choice. On the other hand, being discriminatory could be a profitable venture for somebody like a Chinese restaurant owner or a health club that's willing to discriminate against Caucasians working at the Chinese restaurant, or discriminating against overweight people working at the health club. So Rand Paul's comments were not racist. They were not discriminatory. All he was suggesting is that in the private sector, these sort of things would have eventually worked themselves out.